we will share this once it's over with. It will be on our YouTube as well as possibly uh, on our website as well. But again, thank you all for joining us. Again, really appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to the speakers we have. We do have some great speakers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first talk about ground rules with regards to how we're going to do questions and things of that nature. Give me a second. So again, I kind of mentioned this presentation is being recorded. And one thing we would ask is that you please keep your cameras on. We would love to see your face. Understanding the virtual world we're in today, we would love to see faces. Please make sure that your mic is muted. We will get to a point where you can raise your hand and ask a question. And then, as I just kind of mentioned, please place your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to comment during the end. We will be doing question and answer session at the end of the webinar, and that way you all will be able to hear what is being said, and then maybe have questions around any of that information. As I kind of, you guys have seen in some of these social media posts, our speakers today. And so as you can see, we have Sheridan E. Smith, Benjamin Warner, and Alan Holman. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna turn things over to Marcus Shute, who is our COO of Pruuvn. And he's gonna get us kicked off here and starting with our speakers and their bios.
Great, thanks, Brian. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're looking forward to a great discussion. This afternoon, we have some outstanding panelists who are joining us and took time out of their busy schedule to share with us, so we're appreciative of that. And what I'd like to do is ask each of them just to briefly introduce themselves, their background, and their connection to the gig economy. And then we'll get started with a couple of questions that we have. We'll ask the panelists to comment on. And then, as Brian mentioned, we'll open it up to Q&A after Brian does his presentation on Pruuvn's approach to some of these unique challenges that we see in the gig economy. So with that, I'll start with Sharita. Sharita, if you'd like to give us a brief introduction of yourself and your background and your connection to the gig economy.
Yes. Thanks, Marcus. And thank you guys for having me. This is such a wonderful opportunity. My name is Sharita Smith. I'm from Oakland, California, and my gig work journey started back in 2014 when I decided to sign up for Lyft. I just wanted a part-time opportunity to make some extra money, and I loved driving. I loved, whenever I would go out, I was always the person everyone wanted me to drive. So I'm like, this is a great way for me to make some money doing this. It was a real innocent introduction into this world that has definitely grown into so much more. So I drove part-time for a couple years and then ultimately ended up becoming a full-time driver after having been let go from a corporate job. And I gave myself a year to just be a full-time rideshare driver, not only driving Lyft, but Uber and the child ride care company Zoom out in California. And after a year and 2 days of working as a full-time rideshare driver, I was contacted by Lyft to ask if I wanted to be their corporate liaison between headquarters and all the drivers in the West Coast. So that meant that I was the voice and the liaison between headquarters and all drivers in California, Nevada, and Hawaii. So I would work across all of the teams at the company to try to get the driver voice at the table and get some of the decisions that were made to accurately reflect our needs.
Great.
So, sorry, I don't know how much time I have.
Well, that's fine. I'm sure we'll have time for you to give more perspective. I was going to say that you're going to give a great perspective on some of the challenges that we're going to talk about this afternoon. So that's great. Benjamin Warner, if you'd like to go next, just give us a brief background introduction of yourself and your connection to the gig space.
Thanks for having me. My name is Benjamin, originally from Montgomery County. I'm based in Northern California in Santa Rosa, currently the director of compliance at a wholesale cannabis distributor, the largest in this state. That's a great question as to my connection to the gig economy. I'm actually not sure, but I know cannabis is definitely a major job creator, and not just this state, but across the US. I think if you dive into my work experience, one might think that I'm a gig worker. I think I'm very experienced and savvy in the job market, looking for a specific outcome at any corporation I'm working for. And so I think from that perspective, I may be able to, add some things to the conversation, but I'm not sure whether or not I am connected to the gig economy entirely. But happy to be here, happy to lend any feedback or experience that I've kind of garnered over my short, young career. So
Great. We're looking forward to your perspective. I mean, when we say gig economy, we use that in a very loose definition. That really means any short-term engagement. Could be contract work. It could be delivery solutions, supply chain solutions, where you're using a third party. So, we're defining gig economy pretty broadly. And so I think your perspective, especially in a space that may become regulated, is going to be very unique and very beneficial to the audience. So thank you for being here. And last but not least, we'll let Alan Holman give his brief background and bio and his connection to this space as well.
Hello, everyone. Alan Holman here. I'm coming to you from Prince George's County, Maryland, more particularly Upper Marlboro, Maryland. I've been in roadside assistance, which is, basically providing roadside support for people that are broken down in vehicles for the past 20 years. I've been the sales leader at 3 organizations within this space: General Electric, Allstate, and most recently, Urgently, which was a startup that I worked as the sales leader. And over the course of that time, I have been a strong advocate for providing background checked individuals that provide support. And although technically roadside assistance, most people would not put that in the gig economy space, you're still sending a subcontractor to someone with certain elements of personal identifiable information to provide support for people of all backgrounds 24/7. And so this is an extremely important subject for me. So I'm glad to be here and looking forward to contributing. Thanks, everyone.
Great. So thank you all again for participating in this the webinar that's focused on a very important topic to both enterprises as well as contractors and service providers. So we're going to ask a couple of questions and ask each one of you to take a stab at the first one. That's very important, sort of the general opening question. Then we'll go around and ask the remaining questions and ask that someone take the lead on it, and others can contribute as they see fit if you have more to add to the discussion. So the first question is going to be, what are the major compliance related or safety challenges that you see in your particular business or industry or sector? What are the major challenges that you see businesses facing today from that perspective? So Sharita, if you want to kick it off, we can start there and talk about what you see as major compliance related or safety challenges, and we'll let Benjamin and Alan also comment on that.
Sure. So right now, I mean, what's all over the news is the pressing issue among the gig workers, which is about their classification of their workforce. So Biden's gig worker classification proposal is a really, really, really big deal that will impact all independent contractors, all freelancers, all 1099s, all untethered workers, as I like to call them, for here on out. So it's essentially the same thing as Yes on Prop 22 out in California. And after working on Lyft's Driver Advisory Council, I kind of pivoted over to the campaign as a campaign organizer and their director of women's outreach. I was the person on the ground on this $200 million campaign that was trying to determine whether or not rideshare drivers and app-based drivers were independent contractors or they were employees. Now, the rest of the freelance community was impacted, had already been impacted by AB 5 in California, an Assembly B5, I'll be clear. But Lyft and Uber had the money to put together to try to fight it. And all of the different gig economy companies pitched in, and it ended up being an historical ballot initiative or a ballot campaign that did pass, and it did win. But basically, we were trying to enforce and ensure our protections as gig workers, that we would remain independent and that we would not have to become employees. And unfortunately, it's an issue that is not only affecting, it affects the whole gig economy. Sure, Uber and Lyft were able to put that on the ballot because they have the resources to, but all other industries are still impacted by it. And on a federal level now, that's what this gig worker classification proposal is essentially trying to do, but on the federal level. So this is huge. It's going to impact everybody in the gig economy, all the participants, now even restaurant owners and restaurants, because they rely so much on DoorDash and app-based deliveries. So this is like huge, huge, huge. And it's really, really significant as far as compliance is related in this industry.
Great, that's a very relevant topic, and we're going to dive into that a little more later in the webinar. So thank you for bringing that to the front for that further discussion. Benjamin, we'll move to you next and let you talk about any major compliance related challenges you see in your space.
Yeah, in cannabis, I think such an nascent industry, our biggest challenge is a lack of standardization. So there's a lack of set of standards and processes and structure from firm to firm just within the state. So many regulations that we need to comply with, very highly regulated industry from local level, state level, federal level. Then everyone kind of wants a piece of a cannabis business in some way. So there's facility permits that just kind of pop up out of the woodwork on a week-to-week basis. So I think just a lack of standards from business to business creates a very challenging business environment, very complex business environment that requires leadership to help kind of gracefully navigate through all that. In terms of safety challenges, I would say the lack of banking in our industry creates cash business, and it's a huge cash business. Our trucks are routinely carrying $40,000, $50,000 from customer A to customer B or back to our warehouse. And, whenever there's just cash floating out there on the street and specific locale, it's never, there's always risk involved. So I think just little things that I think we don't think about all the time, given that this is a legal industry in certain states, but always federally illegal. Little things that I think most businesses take for granted, like being able to bank and process payroll electronically and those type of things. Believe it or not, they create, risk exposures and safety challenges for us.
That's great information. We're going to circle back to that. We'll talk about some of the things that you see from your perspective on how you can, solve those kind of challenges, or what kind of solutions might solve those kind of challenges. Alan, we'll move to you and let you talk about, from your perspective, what you see as a major compliance or safety related challenges in your space.
Yeah, sure. As of late, the automobile industry is in sort of a transition. They're really pushing people more towards alternative fuel vehicles, particularly electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles. With that, they're also removing something that we've all grown accustomed to, which is a spare tire. So what that is presenting as a challenge for the industry is no longer can you call and ask someone to bring you 2 gallons of gas if you run out of gas. And let me just tell everyone, people still run out of gas in 2022. But when someone runs out of electricity or power for their EV, the action that's normally taken is take that person and their vehicle to a charging facility, and that person will be there for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour, depending on your vehicle and depending on how far you have to go to get to your final destination. So now you have a safety issue where you're actually sending a subcontractor, regardless of where you're calling from. You're simply sending someone to take someone's vehicle and to leave them sitting idle for a long period of time. So now it is very important that you know, you're aware, and that you have some type of breadcrumbs on that particular person that's going by to help that customer on the side of the road. So the automobile industry is changing. And also, the automobile industry is doing away, particularly in the EV space, is doing away with brick and mortar dealerships. So you're faced with a challenge that you really don't have anywhere to tow someone for a recharge or to take that vehicle. So you're now faced with taking that person home and going back to their home the next day and taking that vehicle to a satellite repair facility. So you've now provided people with the ability to know where someone lives. You can't avoid PII with in this space, and you're taking someone somewhere where they are absolutely going to be idle for a long period of time. So it's very important that you are compliant as it relates to background check, and just doing the standard certification procedures, insurance checks on the service provider. Now, as a reminder, my industry is roadside assistance. So when your car breaks down, you contact an organization that reaches out to their subcontractor network, and they provide that service for you. All those things I just stated are shining a spotlight on the need for having compliant subcontractors and subcontractors that you are absolutely aware of their background. Marcus?
Okay, will you finish, Alan? I don't know if you, because it sort of cut out, at least on my end at the end.
Oh, no, I said I turned it back over to you.
Okay, all right, just making sure. All right. So the next several questions, I'm going to ask it, and whoever wants to jump in first, feel free. If not, I'll do like I did when I used to teach, just call on somebody to speak. So the first question really goes back to what we just discussed, is how do you feel compliance and safety impacts the bottom line in the new gig economy, especially as it relates to your space? Many people say, I mean, don't make the direct correlation of compliance and safety on how it impacts revenue or saves costs or could impact the bottom line. So we just like to hear your perspective on that, on how you think compliance and safety can contribute or impact the bottom line.
I can
In there
start.
first.
Oh.
Go ahead, Shuga. Your thing. Your thing.
Well, I mean, there are over 600 types of freelance and independent contract jobs currently. And after COVID, in the wake of the pandemic and folks were losing their jobs, there was so little safety in the job market. People have turned over to freelance jobs. This is the future of work. The future of work is here. So, we got to get with the program. And I think that it's, I can appreciate how lawmakers are trying to take care of the people. They want to do what's right for the people. They don't want people to be taken advantage of by big corporations. Totally understandable. But I think that there's just a lot of misinformation as far as what the actual needs of independent contractors and freelancers are. So there are, artists, announcers, freelance, tattoo artists, teachers, nurses, nail tech, strippers, all type of careers that rely on the independent contracting, and also small businesses that employ these folks. So it's going to totally it's going to be a real problem if there is no happy medium, or there's no I guess enlightenment up at the top for for lawmakers to really be clear about how kind of to meet us and meet our needs in the middle. Yes, we want to be independent contractors. We don't want to have a boss. We like to have our own schedules and manage our own time. But sure, we also do want some form of protections. I think that's only right. But as the economy is evolving, we just need to figure out how to make it make sense for both parties.
Great point. Benjamin, you were gonna jump in and say something?
So in terms of bottom line revenue, I think traditionally in traditional industries, compliance has been viewed as a inhibitor to revenue. I think what's fun for me in cannabis is redefining that role, redefining the role of compliance at a cannabis business to drive revenue, to remove barriers to sales. For us, that looks like, you know, collaborating with our suppliers on packaging and labeling. We have very onerous packaging and labeling requirements that can trip you up, that seem simple and innocuous, but could lead to a $50,000 fine at a time where you just don't have that cash flow. Similarly, we might have retailers that have questions about a delivery or inventory they're receiving that is compliant, but we have a perceived compliance issue that needs to be explained. So I enjoy kind of using my skill set to navigate those conversations to ensure sales are happening. Going back to the first question, it's just a lack of standards and structure in our industry that requires someone who can step in and understand the boring regulations, but communicate that to multiple, you know, functions, multiple business partners to help drive the revenue and remove artificial choke points in our supply chain that might otherwise impact revenue. So from a non-traditional standpoint, I think if you have the right compliance leadership, you can actually drive a significant amount of revenue, either via savings or process improvement and efficiencies.
That's a great point, because most people do view compliance as a not as a revenue generating cost center. So that's a great point. Alan, you have anything you want to contribute on this point?
Sure. Similar to what has already been stated, it is viewed as an additional need for revenue being spent towards providing services for that particular contract. But I'll go a step further. When you're talking about subcontractors, particularly in certain industries that requires training, working 24 hours a day, and there's a certain danger element to that, like tow truck drivers, helping people on the side of the road through all weather, all times of the day. There's a lot of attrition in that particular industry. And quite frankly, there are other options that are more suitable for their time that's been made available to them in the past 2 to 3 years. So it sometimes gets overlooked as a necessity. However, most of the clients and that are procuring roadside assistance services in the insurance and the automobile manufacturing space, which is all of them, require that they are background checked and compliant. Most of those are still requesting that this take place. So while it's become somewhat of a hindrance from a financial standpoint, it's still a necessity, and it needs to be done, and it has to be done. And one of the things that I left out of that explanation was verification of insurance or verifying certificates of insurance. In some cases, you take, for example, I would take a recent automobile manufacturer that I launched with roadside assistance last year. Their lowest price vehicle is $150,000. So with that type of sticker on a vehicle, you're not only concerned about if that person's background checked, but you're also concerned that if there's some damages that are done to that particular vehicle, will that particular subcontractor have the necessary insurance to cover those damages, so that you don't have to tap into your insurance flow for that. So I think that it is definitely not going away, and similar to the other panelists, it's definitely something that is still extremely important to our space.
Great, thanks for that. While you have the floor, would you mind talking about the impact on customer acquisition and retention? Because we've sort of talked about compliance as a necessity, but how does it impact your ability to acquire customers and retain those customers if you don't have one of a program?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So for I would say for at least the last 15 years, I have not seen a significant request for a proposal for services of roadside assistance that did not include a requirement for background check for service providers. And in my case, service providers, since we have diversity in the industries represented today, again, roadside assistance if someone just joined. So it's very important that the people that are assigned to come and help you on the side of the road, it is very important that they have the necessary background check details available if needed. So it's not going away, and it is a core requirement in each and every roadside assistance campaign. I'll give you an example. Again, I gave you the cost example of the electric vehicle with a very high sticker price, but also insurance companies provide you with roadside assistance. And can you imagine an insurance company that did not do their due diligence in making sure that their subcontractors are properly examined prior to being sent by them technically to provide that particular service for their insured? So it's not going anywhere, and it is present in each and every roadside assistance opportunity.
Thank you for that. Benjamin, you have any comments on that particular question about the impact on customer acquisition and customer retention?
Yep. Compliance, going back to the second question, I'm looking to remove barriers to business for my firm, but compliance is going to slow down customer acquisition and impact retention a little bit. I think it's critical for us. I'll give you just an example from our space. Onboarding and both retailers and suppliers is probably the best way that I can address this question, but all of the business done in California has to be done with a cannabis license as well as a seller's permit, right? So we do have a due diligence process and an onboarding process with all suppliers, all retailers that we do business with, just to, one, assess your legal cannabis business, two, you pay your bills, and three, to assess creditworthiness if that's something that you're asking for. It does slow down the onboarding process a little bit, but it's critical for the long-term success of the business. And not all good business, or excuse me, not all business is good business. And I think the healthy firms are willing to be honest about that, to turn certain customers away, to retain others, to kick others off the platform, and to be nimble about assessing all of that. From onboarding all the way through. So there is an impact. I think it's on the compliance leadership to determine how much of an impact. We do I would say a bare minimum of due diligence. You're either compliant or you're not. You're not getting extra points or extra credit. We're not looking not to do business with you, but we're also not going to risk the entire firm for a single customer. So I hope that answers the question.
Great. Sharita, do you have anything you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, so, talking about impact on customer acquisition and retention, I mean, this has the potential to undermine the business model, period. So just like with Uber and Lyft, they were fighting so hard because if you have to change your workers from independent contractors to employees, now that comes with a plethora of other costs. And that means that you may not have will not have the same amount of drivers or workers that are actually serving customers. So that applies to all companies and all businesses in the gig economy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next question really revolves around what strategies have you seen used today to tackle some of these problems or ensure service provider compliance or customer safety, et cetera? I mean, we really should look at the landscape to see what's currently being used and then look at the gaps in the current system to see what kind of solutions we might propose, going forward. That's the direction that we're going in the webinar. Who wants to jump in first?
I'll jump in. I think for my space, I think it's enforcement. At the present, if you are subcontracting, let's use a market that's familiar to everyone. Let's use Los Angeles. Let's say you're trying, or the LA metropolitan area, particularly, let's say South Central Los Angeles. You might need to have 10 tow companies as subcontractors that have 50 employees. Your requirements is for that particular road, that tow company, the ones that I mentioned, to conduct background checks. But it's really a soft request. We request that you conduct background checks on your service providers or your employees prior to sending them jobs to go help our customers. There's really not a lot of enforcement beyond that particular level. And that's for a couple of reasons. The cost is an issue. Again, attrition is another issue that I mentioned a short while ago. And this is applicable across multiple industries. And after that, just ease of services and the capability of doing this in a very smooth way or an efficient way where you can grab all of their employees without having people take off of work to go fill out a form online, do things, and go somewhere. It needs to be done in a very efficient manner where once you launch with someone or once you bring someone on your team, you're doing continuous background checks as required by the client to make sure that they're compliant. So I think just focusing on it and making sure that you have an efficient way in which those people can have the background checks completed on their employees. So that would be my point on that, Marcus.
Great. Benjamin or Sharita, you want to comment on like the current strategies you've seen used in your space to ensure compliance? And then what are some of the blind spots in those approaches from your perspective?
I can just piggyback on what Alan was saying. I think what we're getting at here, due diligence is the best friend to compliance, and you can't really inform your risk assessment if you don't do the research on what business you're doing with whom. That's the big one there. In terms of blind spots, you don't know what you don't know in our industry. There's just a lot of logical fallacy. I haven't been enforced upon, or this wasn't an issue before, so it shouldn't be now type of thing. Just really faulty logic that can lead you into some bad spots when regulators come walking through the door. So I think due diligence directly informs a risk assessment and allows you to be less reactive from a compliance standpoint. And then the blind spots are what they always are: hubris and logical fallacy.
Yep, great. Sharita, you have any more input on that, on those two?
Yeah, so I think that strategies that I have observed is basically lawmakers taking it to the people and letting the people decide what they feel in order to decide what the future of the gig economy ultimately is, honestly, because the gig economy doesn't exist without the workforce. So the workers are the backbone of the industry. So it's up to the people to inform and to decide and inform what things should look like for us. And I think that, I mean, we saw that with Yes on Prop 22, and then now we're getting ready to see it with the PRO Act. And that is something, like I said, that's the federal version of Yes on Prop 22, essentially. It's already passed in the House, I believe, and it's still waiting to get a vote at the Senate. So, but that'll impact folks tremendously. As far as blind spots, so my thing, I worked on Prop 22. Prop 22 was huge. It was historical. It was so much money, you know, $200 million. It's never been done before. So there were so many people going against it and saying and thinking that Uber and Lyft were buying the vote. And I mean, me personally, I was there. I worked as close as you could possibly work on it. And I wouldn't have worked on it if I didn't want to be an independent contractor. I couldn't have done it if There was no amount of money that they could have paid me for me to be advocating for something that I actually didn't believe in. I personally would have never been a Lyft driver if I had to be an employee. I don't want to be a cab driver. I like Lyft. I like rideshare. I like the flexibility. You can pop in, you can pop out. I made it work for me. And I think that the gig economy is so beautiful because these jobs, you can make them work for you. You know, you don't have to be committed to anything. You can puzzle piece a bunch of different gigs. I was working a lot of different gigs and it has worked for me. And I think that, you know, the gig economy absolutely should be like a gateway to other things. You should be able to walk into a gig job and walk out with your, you know, your career being heightened, as far as I'm concerned, if you do it right. So anyway, just as far as blind spots go, I hate to hear people, especially on these big stages, these different congressmen, talking about how big business and big corporation bought that vote on yes on 22. It's easy to say that, but I talked to a lot of drivers. I mean, hundreds, thousands over the years between the Driver Advisory Council and the campaign, because those were two different things. Driver Advisory Council was strictly Lyft. Yes on Prop 22 was all of the rideshare companies, all the delivery companies, and all of the other independent contractors that were that had the same interests as against AB5. So anyway, I have spoken to so many people and heard their stories about how becoming an employee would ruin their lives, ruin their careers, affect their families, hurt their families, hurt their business models with these businesses that they created. And now, you know, their opportunities are definitely dwindling by them not being able to have the same amount of people that on their as workers for them. So anyway, I just think that as far as blind spots go, that's a big one because it's easy to say that Lyft and Uber, you know, bought the vote, but there are a whole lot of people who really, 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 truly wanted it that way. I was one of them. So when now I really just hope that there will be some information where folks will become informed. Like you said, you don't know what you don't know. But I want them to know that, you know, the companies didn't buy the vote. People wanted that. People want to be independent.
Right, and I mean, a poll that was published that was referenced in that article talked about the new proposal, cited that, you know, more than 60% of adult Americans or US adults supported being independent contractors as opposed to 35% who believe they should be considered employees. So that's a very good point. And that's sort of a great segue into our last question before we let Brian turn it over to Brian, is that talking about future trends as we see this shift to utilizing more independent contractors and service providers. And you just gave us a great introduction to that. So Alan and Benjamin, from your perspective, what do you see as future trends or driving forces related to compliance and the shift in using more independent contractors?
Yeah, I'll just jump in there real quick, Alan, and you're on mute, but my answer will be brief, I promise. I think in production environments in cannabis specifically, I think supply and demand are constantly wavering. I see even currently the trend of hiring temporary workers to support current volume or current volume of orders or production, but not wanting to make long-term commitments to full-time employees, not wanting to pay healthcare costs, et cetera, and also not being able to do those things. So I see in production environments, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, the proliferation of just hiring temporary work on a 3-month basis, or even on short notice for 2 weeks to fulfill a specific order, to pull harvest down, whatever it might be. Yeah, that's my perspective.
Yeah, and I think we're not far off in vehicle-based industries that need support, where there will have to be some form or types of clearinghouses where people have to have certain qualifications, one of them being continuous background check in order to get some of these requests to help people, particularly people that are in need of support while they're on the side of the road. You know, we've talked a lot about regulations and different initiatives, particularly federal initiatives, but one of them that came about back in the summer was requiring that recharging stations for electric vehicles are provided every 50 miles or so throughout the federal highway system. And with that, it's going to require a lot of compliance as it relates to having people that have been background checked and various forms of insurance compliance throughout that particular network as it builds itself out over the next couple of years. And also, I know at the top of the call, if people weren't there, I mentioned that the automobile industry is changing. I mean, dealerships are disappearing. So now people are going to be picking up vehicles from your home and returning them back to you at your home versus picking you up where you broke down and taking you to a dealership, never once having to see where you physically live. But now people are going to have to bring those vehicles there. And I know within the chat, someone mentioned that there's side of the road charging. It's going to be years before that particular technology is to a point where they can get a vehicle back to life, where it can move forward. So you're always going to either have to take someone back to their home or sit with them or drop them off somewhere where they have to sit for several hours. So I think in the future, there is absolutely going to be a hard requirement and/or a heavy emphasis placed on being compliant from a background check standpoint, even more so than it is today.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for your insight and sharing your perspective and knowledge and expertise. And we're going to come back. I saw there are a couple of questions in the chat and comments. So we're going to come back after Brian does his presentation and then open it up for questions. And I think Kiana's going to help us manage that effort. So Brian, if you don't mind, go ahead and bring up your presentation you want to share with others about Pruuvn's approach to compliance.
No, thank you, Marcus. And again, thank all the panelists for your perspective and insight. And so what I want to do, just kind of piggybacking on the whole conversation around compliance and just thinking about the future and what's going to be taking place and how we as an organization intend to help as many companies as we can, enterprises as we can with that compliance. A lot of talk was around the onboarding, training, and just in general, of those individuals, the gig worker contract workforce. And so some of the things we've seen as we've been in the industry is just that utilizing a platform such as ours, typically we can help companies with a 30% reduction in costs to hire workers. So that's overhead costs, time to hire, really some of those things we kind of talked about, 75% from the time to hire standpoint. If you're a gig worker, that's important, contract or gig work. And then reduce screening costs overall. So when you have a system that focuses on compliance, it gives you an opportunity to reduce those costs. But as some of you mentioned, from a continuous standpoint of monitoring and reducing costs of having to go back and forth with regards to re-verifying that information. And so platforms like ours, you look in the left there and you start to see what companies do in current processes when they're talking about compliance as a whole. So sourcing with credential skills requirements, that's usually one platform. Background checks is another platform that you would typically need. Onboarding for document and data, when some of you kind of mentioned a lot of the regulations and things that are required to be collected as an organization to stay in compliance from individuals or subcontractors. Those are things, separate systems, training and assessment, separate systems, and then liability and risk management. So you typically get a system that is comprised of multiple systems, and you want to streamline that. And that's something we do at Pruuvn. It's something we continue to advocate when you build out a compliance program, is having a system that it can allow you to do that. And to Benjamin's point, get an opportunity to not be able to have to always go back and monitor that and have something you can always look at. From a deeper look standpoint, we talked a little bit about compliance in different industries today. This just gives you one look. This is in transportation in general when you start talking about delivery. And this is UPS and some things that they've seen and that we've seen as well. But just in that space, people like trustworthy individuals. Whether you're picking somebody up on the side of the road delivering cannabis, or a gig worker delivering an individual, people want to be reassured and have that safety in mind that they can trust who they are currently with. So that's in every industry, even same day delivery. And then technology, seamlessly having technology that works, that helps with that compliance. We understand 27% of people have a hard time finding technology to do that, whether it's same day delivery or any other industry. And then 88% of consumers, we see that peace of mind, as I kind of mentioned, again, whether you're doing shipments of individuals, cars, products, or services, we see that continues to be something that people are very keen on. You look here from a wide perspective and wide platform like ours, and when you start talking compliance and for all these spaces, and what's important, again, efficient onboarding and credentialing, get people to work a lot quicker, a lot faster, and understanding who they are. And that comes really to reduce the risk and liability. So that is very important when you talk about a gig contract workforce who's very transient. And so those exposures are out there, and you need a way to mitigate that. Attract and retain workforce. Again, if you can't get somebody working fast, you're pretty much going to lose them. And so again, being able to attract and retain that workforce and utilize a system to help you do that, that makes a lot of sense. Maintaining compliant workforce, you hear about the regulation changes with regards to classifying workers. Systems like ours essentially allow you to classify with no problem, because again, our system and systems like ours are built in a way from a compliance standpoint to prove those points, particularly like AB5, we're in California where, you have to have certain criteria to be considered a contract worker. Well, our system was built around making sure that individuals can prove that they're a contract worker or individual independent worker, or gig worker. So those are some of the things that systems like ours really stand out compared to the hodgepodge of developing things and pulling things together. And then again, staying ahead of regulations through the use of a data trust, as we are a different platform, we are a data trust, and we help organizations in that instance with the compliance aspect. There's just another use case. Again, you all have mentioned different use cases, but again, this just tells you, and for us within the transportation industry, we do help companies account for fleet integrity, safety, driver safety, retention, compliance, and advancing technology, and cyber exposure. So those are the things we help organizations with as a platform and a system. So all of these industries we talked about today, that's typically where we lie with regards to helping with compliance and onboarding. Some of the things that I think Sharita talked about, understanding what gig and contract workers want. So you have to think about some of those benefits, ancillary benefits or health, occupational benefits and things of that nature. You don't typically get that when you're a contract worker. So systems like ours as well give individuals that opportunity to have some of those coverages and benefits. Because again, you want to listen to that workforce, and that workforce has different needs outside of what that company may have in mind. And so benefits are very important. So that's something like a system such as Pruuvn or other systems like ours. We try to put that at the forefront to give individuals an opportunity to help with that upper economic mobility. Platforms like ours, again, you integrate very API, webhooks, dedicated URLs. So these are things you want to look for with a system when you're talking about bringing on a compliance system, what's going to help you. So these are the different things like our systems that can help you in ways you can interact with those systems. And so I'll just turn it back over to Marcus, so we can kind of get into the Q&A. But just wanted to give you an idea of a system like Pruuvn, and when we're talking about compliance altogether, what a system like ours can do to help different industries out there.
Great, thank you, Brian, for that. We did have a couple of questions or comments in the chat that we want to highlight, and then we'll open it up for Q&A also. Waldron referenced using blockchain, or how you could use blockchain to help with Benjamin's compliance related issues. I'm not sure I don't know if we can use blockchain directly to combat that, but we do leverage blockchain in a couple of different ways. And we'll let Brian, you can talk about how we leverage blockchain, and also get Benjamin's perspective on whether he thinks blockchain can play a role in satisfying compliance issues in the cannabis industry. I guess alcohol delivery also, but it's highly regulated too.
Yeah, if you start thinking about how blockchain can play a role, similar to alcohol delivery, the cannabis industry is going to be likely highly regulated at some point. Alcohol delivery was not regulated. Now it is very highly regulated in different states. And essentially understanding who that individual is delivering that product is very important. So we use blockchain from a personal identifiable information, where we store that information as well as work history, as well as credentials and certifications, because you have to have certifications to deliver alcohol. So it will likely be similar for cannabis industry, and I'll let Benjamin weigh in. But that's how we use it now, is to hold certs, work history, and personal identifiable information for verification from the regulators.
That all sounds amazing. I wish I knew more about blockchain to answer this question in more color, but that would all track for our industry. We do have a pretty phenomenal AR issue, accounts receivable issue. People don't pay their bills B2B in the state, which is unheard of in a sales-based industry. But a lot of folks do not pay bills, I think, to both ensure payment and to maybe track, again, credit worthiness and net terms. I imagine that blockchain would be pretty helpful in addition to all the things Ryan just listed, but I don't know enough about blockchain to really answer that question.
A great discussion. There was one other question in the chat, then we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions. Kiana, I asked a question about if the new federal regulation is passed, how can local level organizations take advantage of it, or of the new market shift, and will being a business with a national reach become a liability as a business model, given the changes that you might foresee with the new proposed federal legislation that's on the table?
Oh, is that for me?
It's for the panel, but you probably might be the best person to kick it off.
Okay. I was looking at Brian. Okay. I mean, honestly, if this shifts, it's going to be historical, something that we haven't seen before, especially at the federal level. So I really don't know. What I do know is that labor unions will hold a lot of power. So it will behoove organizations to build some relationships and build some relationships there in that direction. So, I mean, we'll see, but it's not going to be good.
No, I actually agree in that respect, because when you start at the top and start messing around with businesses at the bottom, you don't have a good understanding of what you're doing, especially from an employee standpoint. I don't see it being a good move. We'll probably go back and if it passes, we'll probably go back and have some modifications to this after it passes. It's inevitable, to be honest, because there are a lot of people who are up in arms about it at this point.
Yeah, I haven't read the legislation in detail, just understand it is a reworking of the test, like the test that determines whether you're an independent contractor or employee, and it's not much different than what we saw in 2 administrations ago. So as terms of how it impacts the local level, I'm not really sure either, but it's going to be interesting to watch and debate. And like I mentioned, the majority of the public don't believe it's a good idea. So I'm curious to see what happens when this finally plays out. It's going to be very interesting debate to watch.
But sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to add the fact what Brian said, that it'll probably go back and forth. It will absolutely be going back and forth because there's too many people that are on the side that they'll be affected by this, either as business owners or as workers. So there's really no choice. If the PRO Act passes, there's going to be something else to come and try to combat that. Mm-hmm. And it'll go back and forth until there is a happy medium that really satisfies both interests, because this is a significant, huge deal.
Any other comments or questions? I think a poll has been launched. If you'd like to hear from us or talk with us further, there's a poll that's just been launched, and please respond to that if you don't mind. And if there are any other questions, Let's see. Okay, Togo asked a question about the minimum number of contractors that a company should have to be a good fit as a proven client. We'd be happy to talk to you about that offline, but there is no minimum number of contractors. We work with companies that have 1 or 2 drivers, all the way up to organizations that have 15,000 service providers. So there's no minimum for us. But are there any other comments or questions that the audience might have, or any other input that the panelists want to provide as a closing thought?
No, thank you.
Yeah, I don't see any other comments in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised. So with that, Brian, I want to thank you for attending our first webinar. We're going to probably do a series of these or podcasts around topics that are important to contractors and enterprises that utilize contractors and gig workers. And I'd like to thank our panelists once again for taking time out of your busy schedule to share with us. I know the audience appreciates that, and so do we. And we look forward to seeing you very soon at our next event. So thank you once again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Everyone.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.